Hello creatives, I'm j.f.penn from thecreativepenn.com, and today I'm talking about 7 continuation issues to avoid when you're writing a series. Now I have book 1 and book 9 of the ARKANE series here. Now how can you avoid making mistakes so that when readers join your series they go through without spotting errors between things? So we're going to talk about things to avoid today. So the first thing is continuation of character details and character history. And as you go through the books, you have to remember or write something down so that you know what's happened. So let's just start with physical details. So Dr. Morgan Sierra, my main character in the ARKANE series, has a violet slash in one of her eyes. And she's a twin, and her twin sister Faye has a violet slash in the other eye. And even now, as I'm standing here, I can't remember which eye the violet slash is for Morgan. Now, of course, all I need to do is go back to the first book, find the details and include that in the next book. So that's an easy example. Or scars are another one. People put scars on their characters. You always have to remember where you put them. These physical tags. Another one is age. So Morgan has a niece, Gemma, so Faye's daughter, Gemma, and she's quite pivotal in the plot for Stone of Fire. And then later on in the book, so by book 9, how old is she? You know, what it's for me, the age of the adults is not so important, but the age of Gemma, who's 4 in this book, obviously there's a big difference between a 4-year-old and say a 6-year-old. So these are things to watch out for in terms of the stable physical characteristics. And then of course there's injuring your characters. In book 2, Crypt of Bone, Morgan and Jake have a particular encounter which leaves them pretty injured, and the injuries needed to carry through into book 3, Ark of Blood. And so it's really important to keep at least a basic. You don't need a full series Bible if you're not that organised, and I certainly haven't got like a massive Bible of my world, but if you keep a list of what your characters have and then how they develop over time, then you can at least refer back to that. The next thing is how much to repeat with each book, because with a series, the idea, well, for me anyway, is that people could jump in at book 9 and they could read End of Days as a standalone book. They shouldn't have to have read any of the other books to really enjoy the story. So for me, and I've done another video on series, standalones, that type of thing, but for me, the series book should be able to stand alone. And indeed, that's been my aim with all of my books throughout everything I write. You should be able to read each of the books and it should be self-contained. So for me, I have to repeat each time a little bit about the history of ARKANE, and ARKANE being a secret government agency in Britain that investigates supernatural mysteries around the world. So I just kind of have to have that explanation every time, and a couple of lines about Morgan and her background as first of all in the military, in the IDF in Israel, and then into as a psychologist. So she has that background, so we know she has military training and also is into psychology and religion and that type of thing. Sounds a bit like me, except I don't have any background in the military. But hey, we all have to have an alter ego, right? But basically, the repetition needs to be enough to give the new reader what they need, but also not too much so that you don't bore the existing reader. The next thing is what you remember versus what ends up in the final book, because sometimes what we write in the first draft is not what we end up with in the final draft, and we've edited and we've changed things, maybe we've added stuff, maybe we've gone back and shifted things, and sometimes our minds can go, oh, that I definitely had that in there, or I definitely put that clue, or I definitely had that character doing that, and then you have a look at the actual published, the actual published book, and it doesn't have that in. I've had this a number of times. Most recently in Map of Shadows, there's a detail that I had in the original version that after it went to my editor, we decided to remove, and I'm like, I must remember that didn't happen. So you have to include what happens in the reader's mind, not what happens in your mind. And if that means you have to reread all your own books when you write the next in the series, then so be it. The other thing to consider is, if you're writing a series, the continuation of the series. So even though I just said that you should be able to, you should be able to essentially jump from book 1 to book 9 without reading the books in between, what you also want is to open enough loops as you go through the writing so that readers of a series have something to look forward to. So you don't want to resolve everything in every book. You do want to open kind of secondary plot points that will carry through, so that and of course this is more evident in the epic fantasy series. So you might know Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. Now obviously the series arc is who is going to get the Iron Throne, but in each of the books you could kind of read them as the ongoing lives of the characters involved. I should say the ongoing lives and deaths of the people involved. If you know that series, it's pretty bloody. But basically, remember to open things that you can deal with in the future, the sort of open loops in a reader's mind that make them want to see how things go over the series. Then you have to decide with your main character, and it is kind of related to that, whether your main character is going to change over time or whether they remain the same in a sort of episodic manner. So, a good example of a character who doesn't change is Jack Reacher, Lee Charles Jack Reacher, who essentially in every book he arrives with nothing in a new town and, beats up some bad guys, rescues people, and then leaves town again. It's a kind of modern Western. And he's a sort of Lone Ranger type. And the point is he never changes. He's always the same character. Even if in the book he has a mini character arc, he will always end up leaving again. So he returns to his beginning point. For me, with Morgan Sierra in the ARKANE series, she changes because of what she experiences, as in, if you face off with a demon in a bone church, for example, it's going to leave some, you're going to think about life. So I have some movement there, some development, and there is some development in her relationship with Jake Timber, who ends up being her partner in ARKANE. But I don't have this big journey as yet. I'm at book 9 and we're still going. But if you have, going back to George R.R. Martin in Game of Thrones, of course, there are character arcs that happen because people do die. So, and it's very hard to talk about this without spoilers, but there's a main character in the first series that you think is the main character, and then he dies and you're like, whoa, okay, that happened and that was his arc. Of course, he can't carry on after that, although, again, in Game of Thrones, people do come back. But it's interesting to think about how your character is going to change across a series, if you have a plan for that character to change or not. And then, of course, there is timescale, and this is definitely something to consider. I think Kathy Reichs with Temperance Brennan and Bones has moved the age forward of the character and her niece, and continues to move through the lifespan of her main character, whereas somebody like James Bond, what's interesting with the Bond movies, at least now, is that they're jumping all over the time scale and you don't really know who's moved on. Bond should be about 100 by now, and that's kind of what I'm going for with my ARKANE books. I'm compressing timescale so that realistically it could all happen quite quickly. So you have to think about that with timescale. For example, at the end of certainly of Crypt of Bone, it immediately jumps into Ark of Blood. So you can read the final chapter of Crypt of Bone and then immediately open Ark of Blood and the book carries on. For other ones, there's been a bit of a break, and there's going to be there's a definite break at the end of Days before the next book. So thinking about timescale over multiple books and about how your character will age and how the world changes in that period is really important. This is, I think, possibly easier for historical novelists who have historical evidence of their time periods. So obviously you have to write into those periods. So for those of us writing more contemporary, we still have to be aware of that. And then finally, I've talked about cover design separately, but one of the big continuation things to think about is cover design, and making sure that if you are progressing a series, you have a series look to your books. And kind of what you don't want is book 1 to look completely different to book 9. You want a series design that carries through. So again, if you look at books 1 and books 9, you can see that the running people are shown, and basically it's just the location that's different and different elements of the book, but the font's the same, the character name's the same, and the element of the 2 running people, which kind of indicates it's a thriller. So having that retrofit, I mean, obviously if you've not got a series look, then think about going back and retrofitting a series look so that the reader understands the continuation of the book. Okay, so today I've talked about 7 continuation issues to avoid when writing a series, and if you would like some help with your novel, check out the 7 steps to write your novel below, or at thecreativepenn.com/7 steps. Right, I'll be back next week with another video, so happy writing!